Hi, this is Rock. We're going to look at the Makearray function, which is a lot like sequence, and I've found it so helpful, and it steps in and answers questions that you didn't know you had until you get to the point where you're trying to build something and you're like, wait, I need to be able to fill this in with this information, and you're like, wait a minute, what does Makearray do? That might be it. And it is. It's exactly what you need to do in those situations. It's kind of hard to describe what those situations are until you're working hard and you're trying to build something and you get there. But let me try to imitate it. Let's look at Makearray. It looks for 3 arguments in this. The first is the number of rows. Second is the number of columns. And then the third asks for a function. And with that, I usually use the lambda function. So let's say we're going to have a 15 row and a 15 column array, and that the function is going to be the rows times the columns. But in order to enter a function, the way to do that is to use the lambda function. So I'm going to enter lambda. This is probably the first one I've introduced that needs a lambda function. Let's take a look at this. It takes 2 variables. Right after the lambda opening parentheses, it wants 2 variables. And these variables correspond. They always correspond to the previous fields that have been before the lambda in the main function. So this first one will be represented first. What variable do we want to call that? Well, we could call it row, right? But because row is already a function, just the letters ROW spell out the function. So I'm not going to use row, but I can use R. I feel comfortable doing that. So a comma, now it's looking for the variable name for the column. Again, column is something that is its own function. So let's go ahead and just use the letter C as the variable name for this in the lambda function. So that's just to set the fact that these 2 variables, R and C, correspond with 15 and 15, which in this case is the number. So it goes 1 through 15 is R, and then 1 through 15 is also C. Now's where we put in the actual mathematical function here, which let's say R times C. As we do this, note that what's happening here is in any lambda reliant function, you need to introduce what the variables are and then give those variables names after the lambda. And then you do something with those variables. So right now we're multiplying them by each other. The syntax is a little tricky, but once you get used to it, it makes sense and it gives you a lot of flexibility for creating the variables that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and we'll see what that looks like. And you can picture that there's a sequence over here of 15 and also a sequence across the top of 15, like that. So you can picture that as these being the columns and these being the rows, if that's helpful, because what we're doing here is we've told it in making an array to multiply 1 through 15 through 1 through 15. So that's what we've got. So if you look at the relationship between F5 and the 1 through 15, it's at 2 here and it's at 1 there. So 2 times 1 is 2 and so on. And that's how we build out this array. So that's how Makearray works. There are other things you can do. I did the multiply because I think it's pretty straightforward. I could have divided. That's one way to look at it. And in this case, if it's 1 divided by 1, it's always going to be 1, 2 divided by 2, 3 divided by 3. So the 1 continues all the way down here to the end. There are lots of other things that we will use Makearray for in developing more text-based. I'll teach you how we leverage this Makearray not just mathematically, but also to build answers to data questions. So that's pretty exciting. This Makearray thing, like I said, it's hard to explain not in the wild, but once we get out into its native habitat, you'll look around and ask, isn't there something that does this for me? And here it is, it's Makearray. So I hope you enjoyed that. We'll next be looking at choose calls and choose rows. See you there.